Hello, everyone. I am Vivek Grewal. I lead the technical consulting team at Well Labs. And I have Gopal here with me from EDF. Gopal, do you want to please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. Great to be here with you. I'm Gopal Penny. I'm a senior scientist at Environmental Defense Fund and have the pleasure of working really closely with you, of course, and Well Labs on this project.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure working on this project and some of the other ones in the past year or so. In this video, we are going to talk in detail about an evaluation that Well Labs and Environmental Defense Fund did together recently. It's an initiative from the organization called WASSAN, and the initiative is primarily located in the states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and basically it tries to address the issue of uh, uh, insecurity of water for rain-fed agriculture during monsoons. Like I think many of you would know, the rainfall in semi-arid areas can be quite erratic in nature, and crops often have these critical growing periods where they need significant amounts of water. And like we know in India, around 50% of agriculture is often rain fed, and these farmers are often small and marginal and are often vulnerable to the vagaries of climate. And under climate change, one thing is for sure, that the frequency and intensity of droughts is increasing, and also for India, the number of dry days, in terms of consecutive uh, lack of water for a longer period, that number is also increasing. And that though that patch of dry days, if that occurs during a critical growing period for agriculture, it can be very devastating for farmers, and that is the primary medium through which droughts essentially impact farmers. And this initiative by Wasan essentially tries to address that, and we'll go through in detail about how it addresses. But fundamentally, you can think of it as a climate adaptation intervention. This picture that you see here essentially tries to give a broad sense of the landscape in which it's situated. This is in Rayalaseema, and in the district of Anantapur in Andhra Pradesh. And you would see these pipelines here, which are essentially where there are some bore wells, but uh, multiple fields are essentially connected through these pipelines. So this is a groundwater collectivization project, which is on the one hand using pipelines and as hard infrastructure, and water user groups like these on the bottom right to share groundwater collectively, and essentially help the rain-fed farmers access groundwater to save their crops in terms of during monsoons, and ensure that they have a sustained yield and are more resilient. Gopal, please feel free to add whenever you would like.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think that was an excellent introduction. One thing that I find really interesting about this program is how the pipeline contributes not only infrastructure, but also to helping shape how people think about the water system. And so it enables new rules and norms to come into place to support rural livelihoods in a place where it's quite difficult to sustain and have reliable income due to all the issues that you mentioned.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we believe it as a good, possibly impactful intervention for climate change. That's why we are evaluating in detail and looking at the applicability. So we want to keep it short, this video. So I would briefly touch upon some of the elements on the slide, but would encourage the viewers to pause and read through any other elements that I or Gopal might skip over for brevity. So the key features for these the groundwater collectivization program here that is led by WASSAN, that there are two key pieces, like I said, and the bottom bullet essentially illustrates that there is a pipeline system, uh, and there is a water user association. And fundamentally, the idea is that the non-borewell owners get 3 to 4 assured irrigations during monsoon. And the reason borewell owners share their water through the into this network in their patch of the village is that they are also able to overcome their fragmented land and irrigate fields that might be far away from their borewells. And this is well illustrated in this picture on the right. So the yellow dots here are the wells. The blue line is the main line, and the centers of these circles are outlets, and there are some sub pipelines. So essentially, from this downstream well, which is downstream of a stream and a dam here. So supposedly, a prolific well that is able to irrigate a large patch of the village and areas, for example, where one might not get successful bore wells, or the rain-fed farmers who do not have a borewell, or like I said, borewell owners who might have land far away from their borewells. So essentially, this grid that you see is able to overcome these disparities and supply water to a larger area. So we are going to evaluate this the intent of the program over this deck. We are going to share the results. A couple of more points on the description of the program. Like I said, it's essentially a climate adaptation program for protective irrigation for rain-fed farmers. There are times when upland areas are not able to get water. This pipeline network helps that. And the idea is also to have some focus on sustainability, I would say, in the sense that there is a borewell digging ban to the water use among the water user association members, that within the area of the collectivization project, you can't add more borewells to negatively impact sustainability. And I'll come to a few more ideas that the borewell association has for sustainability. And so moving on to that, these are some example rules. So this program has been done in around 70 villages across Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and each area, each water user association comes up with their own rule. But this is a representative sort of list of norms that some of these institutions have. So just to give you an idea, the idea is to share water with the borewell owner, do crop planning to limit the overall water usage, reduce area under paddy cultivation to increase the water productivity in terms of amount of water used, no new borewells to be drilled for 10 years, and so on and so forth. So the pipeline side adds to the access, the borewell water user association kind of maintains and enables that access in a social sense, and also tries to increase the productivity of the water. So these are some of the elements of the program, and I would like Gopal to walk us through the theory of change for the program.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. So, the theory of change which we're presenting on this slide really serves a couple of purposes. So firstly, when we started this program, we wanted to make sure that we had a clear understanding of the different challenges that farmers are facing in this region. how the program seeks to address those issues, both by the direct kind of interventions that the program makes, the processes by which those interventions are kind of given or provisioned to the villages, then some of the outputs, outcomes, and the ultimate impact that the program seeks to have. So what we're really trying to do here is be explicit about our understanding through conversations with households in the village, through conversations with WASSAN, about the challenges and then the mechanisms by which the program works. This is really important because when we're designing the monitoring, evaluation, and learning assessment, we want to be zeroing in on specific elements of the theory of change, in particular the ones that we feel are maybe most important to study, to understand how the program is functioning, and then also to get to some of the ultimate outcomes that we want to see from the MEL assessment, which is really to support the program in being effective, and in this case in particular, support WASSAN in thinking about ways in which the program might be expanded or grown to really expand beyond these 70 plus villages, the benefits of the program. So I'm not going to go into all of the specific details of the theory of change, although they're highlighted on this slide. I'm just going to highlight some of the key elements that Vivek has already mentioned, to illustrate how essentially we're trying to develop a causal chain that's linking the intervention with some of the outcomes. So one of the main challenges of this region is that there is sporadic rainfall in the dry season. Sorry, sporadic rainfall in the monsoon season, and this is really challenging for particularly rain-fed farmers who can experience crop failure if there's a prolonged dry spell and there's just not enough water to sustain crop growth. So what WASSAN does is build this irrigation infrastructure, the pipes to connect borewells with other fields that don't have borewells. Alongside this infrastructure, there's a set of rules that are developed within the village for water sharing amongst users. And in every village or every groundwater collective, those rules have to include provisioning of borewell water to rain-fed farmers. In the monsoon season, in particular, when groundwater is going to be more readily available, borewell farmers will turn on their pumps. Their rain-fed farmers will open their valves and be able to get that irrigation, particularly when there's dry spells and when they need it most, when the risk of crop failure is highest. So that is directly going to translate to increased and more reliable yields for rain-fed farmers, and then that's going to contribute to more stabilized income, more stable livelihoods, and support just the local economy in general. So that's kind of just one description of maybe some of being explicit about the specific ways in which the program supports rain-fed farmers. But then there's a number of other elements in which the program supports irrigated farmers, in particular in Rabi season, being able to grow more crops. And then, as Vivek mentioned, there's also an element of the program that focuses, on overall groundwater sustainability by thinking about using more water efficient irrigation, supporting households and farmers to gain access to subsidies for micro irrigation to have more efficient irrigation, and then also by thinking about ways to diversify the crop selection within the villages, in particular thinking about ways to sustain incomes while shifting towards more water efficient crops. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but that's maybe some of the highlights from the theory of change. And this is really how we structured our thinking, as I mentioned, around the MEL assessment. You can see all of the H1, H2, H3, et cetera. These are specific hypotheses that we go into depth in our report on the MEL assessment on each of the hypotheses and how we go about evaluating them. Anything else to add on this slide? Okay. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So in this slide, we're looking at basically a bit of the study design that we implemented. So we're focused, predominantly on Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. You can see the area in green on the right panel is the Rayalaseema region of Andhra Pradesh. That's where most of the study villages were. We selected 12 villages that had groundwater collectives. These are our treatment villages. Then we have 12 associated control villages so that we can compare between, the treatment and the control across each of the study sites. We ran a number of farmer surveys. This gave us some quantitative information about outcomes of the program, things like yield and farmer income. A comprehensive borewell census to understand when borewells were drilled, how deep they were drilled, the status of those borewells over time. A number of focus group discussions and in-depth interviews. And these were really valuable in terms of understanding how farmers understood the program, and also kind of teasing apart different aspects of the program to understand how it was functioning and how it's changed over time. So the combination of surveys and kind of in-depth, more qualitative discussions really works together to provide a detailed picture of how the program is functioning. So I think we can go to the next slide again. So with that in mind, we focused on a number of research questions. We really had kind of 6 questions that guided our focus. And these 6 questions, we can think about them broadly in terms of farm production questions, and then separately some questions around water sustainability. So we wanted to know how the program has affected the overall economic status of farmers. We wanted to know the effects on yields for borewell and rain-fed farmers. We also wanted to know, how is the program affecting access to irrigation for both of these types of farmers, and then how is that access to irrigation affecting cropping intensity? Whether farmers can grow crops just in the rainy season or also in the rabi or dry season. So then we're also interested in some of these questions around water and groundwater sustainability. Has the groundwater collective program improved water use efficiency? So are we getting more production per kind of quantum of water used? And then also ultimately, are we sustaining incomes even while we're being more efficient with our water use? To what extent has the program reduced competitive groundwater drilling was another important question that we had. The idea of stabilizing incomes in the region is not just about, sustaining the revenue or the income that's coming in, but also reducing some of the costs that farming households have. Drilling bore wells is, a high cost, particularly as groundwater is continuing to decline to greater and greater depths. And then finally, has the program contributed to a stabilization of groundwater levels, particularly in dry season? These questions, groundwater sustainability was an issue or I would say a concern that the program sought to address, even if it wasn't necessarily the kind of central concern around stabilizing incomes. But in thinking about scaling the program, we wanted to have a sense of how the program was interacting with these various outcomes. So that kind of covers the broad research questions. Up front, we want to just highlight some of the main findings from the assessment. We're going to go into them in detail after this slide, but just to give a really high level portrait of how the program is functioning across the villages. What we're looking at here are different outcome variables that we considered. We did some statistical analysis comparing these outcome variables after the program had been in effect for a number of years. Most of these outcome variables we assessed in, 2023, 24, and then compared them also, with the status of these variables before the programs went into effect. So about 10 years prior. Of course, this is based on recall. There's a little bit of uncertainty, but we used an analysis that compared the treatment villages with the control to try to ensure that there's no bias in terms of the ability of farmers to recall. The other thing I want to mention is that we're defining kind of positive impact in terms of the direction that we want to see, or kind of what we would see as a good outcome. And negative is kind of like an undesirable outcome. The gray background means there's a statistically significant result, and then the white background means it's not statistically significant. So we can kind of see both the direction, but also kind of the impact and the confidence that we have in the impact. So we found that the program increased farmer profit, in particular in the monsoon season for rain-fed farmers. This is a really critical finding because this is, I would say, if the program does nothing else, it wants to, improve reliability of income for rain-fed farmers in Kharif for monsoon season. And so this is like a really important and strong finding. We're really excited to see that. The program also had an effect on crop yields. In particular, we found the strongest effect on crop yields in the dry season, the Rabi season, for borewell farmers. So this is an outcome of the program, borewell farmers being able to expand their irrigation footprint to larger fields and have more reliable irrigation in the dry season. We found an increase in cropping intensity. So another interesting finding, likely a result of the expansion of the irrigation access. There was an increase in leasing in Rabi season, so basically meaning kind of a freeing up of, let's say, the land market to improve outcomes, but this result wasn't statistically significant. We didn't find a significant change in micro irrigation when looking at the number of farmers that increased micro irrigation. And again, this is relative to the control. So we did see an increase in the number of households with micro irrigation, but not necessarily relative to the number of households increasing micro irrigation in the control. There may be some differences if we were to look at the area under micro irrigation, but that just wasn't in the scope of our study. One of the really interesting findings was around the adoption of less water intensive crops. So what this meant was that there was greater adoption of low water intensive crops in Kharif season. And then there was a reduction of highly water intensive crops in Rabi season. So both really kind of important findings that not only is the infrastructure working to increase water access, but also the socialization and the trainings that are being done by WASSAN are helping kind of shape the awareness and the way in which farmers are approaching cultivating crops. I think for some of the borewell digging ones, we have some slides on this, and maybe instead of going through them now, we'll save them for later. Yeah, okay. Can see you're in agreement, Vivek. If there's anything you want to add, please feel free, but otherwise, I'll pass it back to you.
Right. No, thanks, Gopal. Just wanted to add that if you could see that there are more positive signals on the left side compared to the right side, and essentially the left side is more on, like Gopal said, increase in socioeconomic parameters, and the signal is relatively mixed in terms of if you can call it sustainability, but there's also not enough kind of statistically significant signal coming out of that data. So in a gist. So that was a gist, and we have some slides on the details on it, but and we don't want to dwell on it too deeply. I'll just go over the headline takeaway for each of these results, and the viewers are welcome to pause and read through the broader understanding. And going through each of these individual parameters quickly. So the first one is on agriculture profit. Essentially, if you see the graph, it talks about the increase in profit from 2011 to 2024. These interventions spanned different years in different villages between these 2 years, and essentially you would see all the different categories increase their profit. But I would like to take your attention to the Kharif side, where we found the increase to be more statistically significant, essentially the p-value being less than 0.05. So essentially the agriculture profit, like Gopal said, increased significantly during the Kharif season. And you would see the comparing, and all of these significance values are based on the comparison between the treatment and the control. So in one line, the treatment is significantly better than control in Kharif if for agricultural profit. Similarly, for the yield, also you would see, compared over these 13 years, most categories, all categories increased by a large margin. But here, the Rabi increase in yield was more significant, or statistically significant, essentially. So and one can imagine that with availability of water, you would and overcoming land fragmentation, you would be able to get better yield by irrigating or having more access to water. And then similarly, moving on to cropping intensity, essentially the measure of, do you have how much, what fraction of farmers cultivated. So the y-axis here is what fraction of farmers cultivated in a particular season. Kharif, obviously, more people cultivate than Rabi. And if you see the two pre-intervention numbers for treatment and control, they are quite similar. But after the treatment, the green, which is the treatment, showed a differential improvement in terms of Rabi irrigation. So Rabi cropping. So essentially, the intervention was enabled more people to irrigate and grow crops. So a clear signal on increased cropping intensity. This is for the same parameter. The previous slide was on through the survey, and this one is through remote sensing. So we checked the normalized difference vegetation index for treatment and control villages, which are green and blue. So within the treatment patch, before the intervention happened somewhere in the middle. Earlier it was similar, and then there was a differential between the treatment and control. You would see after the treatment, after the treatment, which happened somewhere between in the 2010s, essentially. So there is this same signal in the survey data that is in the remote sensing. So it's good to triangulate and understand that. So this is quite unequivocal. Then coming on to the crop productivity, here basically we are seeing, did people, so we have divided the different types of crops into high water intensity crops, moderate and low water intensity crops. So do they require less or more water? And if you remember in the description of the intervention, we said that the borewell collective essentially convinces people to choose more water efficient crops so that the water can be used more efficiently and more people can use it. And we see mixed signals here. The y-axis essentially is a relative change in proportion for that category of crop. So, for example, I'll take for the Rabi season compared to 2011 to 2024, the moderate water intensity crops, and a lot of this is horticulture, uh, they increased, and the high water intensity crops decreased. So at the x in the treatment group, basically, so the green bars, so the below zero green bar shows that high water requirement crops reduced, and they essentially shifted to the moderate water intensity crops. There are other things happening. It's complex, but that is one signal that is statistically significant. And the paddy cultivation, which was also specifically kind of part of the intervention, at least in some villages, paddy cultivation also decreased significantly. So that is how the program essentially tries to bring in sustainability, ensuring that more people have water and more people use water in more efficient ways. And I'll give it back to Gopal for these last few borewell results.
Yeah, so just to quickly go over a couple of the borewell results, as mentioned earlier, one of the goals was to reduce kind of the effective competitive drilling and the need to kind of continually chase the water table deeper. So what we're looking at in this slide is the borewells drilled in the treatment and control before and after the implementation of the program. And what we see is that, firstly, in the treatment, there's less borewells being drilled, both before and after the groundwater collectives were instituted. In the control, there's a higher number, and there's also more of an increase after the groundwater collective came about. So, I think one thing is that the collective had an effect on reducing the overall number of new borewells drilled. So that's an important finding. There was a rule to not drill any new borewells within the groundwater collectives, kind of across the board. But what we're looking at here is actually that many of the members of the group still were able to drill new borewells outside of the actual physical area of where the groundwater collectives were established. And so, this there's a positive effect, but it's not kind of absolute. And so I think, we're going to kind of come back to this point when we get to the recommendation section, with this effective drilling new borewells outside of the treatment area. I think we can go to the next slide. So in addition to the number of new borewells that were drilled, we also looked at the depth of borewells as they were drilled over time. And so on the left, again, we're looking at the median depth of borewells drilled for both the treatment and control over time. And what we generally see is that there's an increase in the depth of new borewells drilled. And we considered the trend of both the treatment and the control, and there's no statistically significant difference between these trends over time. So that means that the new borewells that are being drilled, they're having to go to greater depths. We also looked at the overall failure rate by installation year across both groups. And what we can see is that, there's a lot of variability year to year, but overall, the failure rate of new borewells is increasing over time. And I'd encourage you, to read the quote here to kind of drive this point home. But in the sake of time, I think we can keep moving forward. All right. So on this slide, what we're looking at are some considerations that we thought may be important for um, kind of the institutional setup or the way in which the groundwater collectives are managing the collective operation of the program. And so these included things like conflict resolution mechanisms, monitoring users, monitoring resources, um, arrangements for how water is shared, like the formal and informal agreements, and then whether or not there's any sanctions. Um, what we found is that each of these elements of the formal and informal kind of rules and operations really varied across villages. Some villages were a little bit more formal in their implementation of the program, some were less formal. Um, but I think one of the interesting things that we found over time, and one of the main things that I would like to mention, is that the programs became increasingly informal over time as households and farmers basically developed an understanding for how the program functions. So even though there may not have been a strong awareness of the formal written agreement across all of the villages, in every case there was a strong understanding of the informal agreement and kind of informal processes through which the program was implemented. So, for instance, we found in many cases that there were a lot of meetings initially to set up the program, and then those meetings kind of decreased over time as the program was socialized, and there wasn't necessarily as strong a need to have those meetings. Similarly, even though we don't see necessarily clearly written out graduated sanctions, we also didn't hear any instances of violations or complaints that folks are not adhering to the rules within the program. So I think, even though it's not as formal, that's, a good sign in the sense that the program is being socialized and it's operating in a way that integrates with the actual kind of day-to-day needs of folks within the village. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, Vivek, unless you have anything to add.
Right. No, so actually, before we go to the enablers and barriers for the program, I just wanted to kind of conclude on the results a little bit. Essentially, it's clear that the overall access has increased, and we have to keep in mind, these are really relatively small and marginal farmers who often feel the brunt of sporadic rain monsoon. And in these hard rock terrains, I think we didn't talk enough about the geology, but in these hard rock terrains, essentially there are patches of areas or villages where there is more availability of water, and some patches where there is less. Borewells are bound to get successful in some areas, let's say higher up, and less successful in higher uphill areas, more successful in the valley areas. And this fundamental difference in availability or endowment of water connected to their land is something that this program is trying to overcome. A patch of the village has the water, and this program is trying to get it more equitably distributed. So it does that quite successfully, but the sustainability thing is the big question, right? There are signals that the depth of borewells and the failure rates are increasing. So it's questionable there. Uh, but we should also remember that these are hard rock granitic areas which have limited storage, which compared to the annual recharge might often be not very large. So what that means is the interannual water availability might not be that much. So it's not like Punjab where you are kind of borrowing from a much larger thing which you are ready to going to collapse in the coming years or anything like that. So there are sustainability issues, but it's this classic development and sustainability question, and it's the data is in front of you to understand and make sense of it. Now, moving on to the enablers and barriers quickly, where we want to finish this quickly and keep the video short. But now coming to the enablers and barriers, essentially, the idea is to expand, see what makes this collectivization program succeed or inhibit. If we want this to be successful in other areas which are similar, what are the enabling factors? So one thing we realized while talking to people in all these focus group discussions is that land fragmentation is a major reason why both sides, the borewell owner and the non-borewell owner, both are able to come together and benefit, and the whole system goes to a higher equilibrium of land and water use essentially. So if there's more land fragmentation in this new area, this would probably work well, and it would be easy to implement. If there is heterogeneity in aquifer characteristics, like I said, certain part of the village has more water, other part does not, having a pipeline to distribute it makes sense. And then semi-arid areas with erratic monsoon, that is the problem we're solving. Erratic monsoon and rain-fed farmer vulnerability, if that exists, then people would want to take this up. If there's inequity in access currently to overcome, that would help people. And small and socially homogeneous groups, we saw that most people in a group were of the same caste. So these are the enabling factors, and then there are things that we found which would be difficult for the program to implement. They would act as barriers. Essentially, the free rider problem of this, the way this was being implemented, this was only a fraction of the village. The average group size could be somewhere around 20 farmers or something like that, and there could be multiple groups in the village, but there are large patches of the aquifer or the watershed or the village where people are not part of the group, right? And even if these farmers reduce their water usage, move away from paddy, or have micro irrigation and things like that, the other people might still continue to go deeper, extract more water. So those free riders technically essentially would still exist, right? And then there is a lack of clear incentive essentially to decrease water use. It seemed essentially the no direct sanctions, and then a lack of monitoring and regulatory mechanism on who is doing what and what are the ways to bring people to nudge people to better ways. And then a lack of federated entities also hinders scaling. Essentially, if people were able to have a higher level federations, that would really enable sanctions from the top, and also overcome these free rider issues. So but they're not there. So essentially these are some of the issues with scaling, but on how to resolve some of these, and I'll go over them briefly and ask Gopal also to add. But essentially, trying to overcome the free rider problem is very beneficial if we want people to use water more productively. You can't ask someone to use less water and their neighbor is using more water. That is very difficult. So matching the scale of the collective to the scale of the aquifer or the watershed is very important. Next, bridging scales by incorporating water collectors into larger governance networks. For example, similar federated entities at the Gram Panchayat level or the block level, which are able to look at things at a higher level and also consider, downstream effects or upstream effects of water sharing, which are also very important in the long run. Of course, difficult to do, but in patches, in this particular area, people did want to kind of in a few villages, people did want to have more groups. So that can be something to explore, and then expanding to better monitoring and information technologies. Essentially, the idea is to enable the farmer to use water more efficiently, knowing when the soil moisture is low, where which are the areas, like for the larger collective, they should know that what are the areas that are using water more efficiently or less water. Essentially, that could be the fundamental knowledge point on which the most important thing, this incentives and sanctions could be based. So through information, we can enable incentives and sanctions which are fundamental to collective governance of common pool resources. These are just simply not available right now. There have been cases of people. There were a lot of cases of people digging new bore wells outside the group area, but in rare cases, people did it inside the area also. And in terms of moving towards more water productive crops, there was mixed success, and so part of it is because of lack of sanctions. So these are the incentive structures which in the long run would make collectivization happen, right? Like with any common resource. So these are the things that have to be fundamentally added for scaling to happen. Gopal, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the big challenges with scaling, with the existing programs, WASSAN has kind of gone village by village and done, I would say kind of intensive work, working with households, explaining the program, socializing the idea behind the pipeline, the idea behind water sharing. The groups, I think, also we saw formed often around some familiarity. The households that joined the groups were somewhat, maybe they knew each other through interactions, maybe their relatives. I think as the program starts to scale potentially more quickly, there's a challenge of potentially less familiarity between water users within the group. There's, especially if we think about matching the scale of the collective to the scale of the aquifer, that means we're going to have a bigger footprint, which means more users that are, probably not going to know each other as well. They're not going to have the same interactions and familiarity and trust. And so I think this is where, one of the key challenges comes in having some, governance support from higher levels where there's confidence, not only in monitoring, but also in some sanctions and enforcement, so that trust in the program overall continues to function over time. And I think that's one of the great opportunities with expanding this program is some of the new technologies that are emerging for monitoring and linking that with governance structures. But it's also one of the great challenges in how to actually make that operational, both in terms of the effectiveness, but then also in terms of ensuring that there's confidence among the, groundwater collectives and the members that the program is functioning as it should be, so they continue to follow the rules and norms of the program.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. I think we're towards the close, but I'd like to end with a forward-looking thing where I think so. We are starting this new evaluation of the Atal Bhujal program, both Environmental Defense Fund and Well Labs, and it's really this program itself is a microcosm of that larger groundwater governance program. So it also gives us a much richer understanding of how incentives would work at the local level for groundwater governance, and how hydrogeology would matter. So taking all of these learnings forward into that Atal Bhujal Yojana program also, and looking at the groundwater governance there also would be very interesting. So let's end it at that. Thank you.